Most people think narcissists reveal themselves through obvious arrogance, the loud bragging, the constant need for attention, the way they dominate every conversation. But the truth is, most narcissists are far more subtle than that, especially in the beginning. In fact, when you first meet them, they often appear incredibly charming. They seem confident, attentive, even emotionally intelligent. And that's exactly why so many people don't notice the first test. Because yes, narcissists often test people very early, sometimes even on the first date. Not in an obvious way, not with something dramatic, but with small moments that quietly reveal how much they can get away with. And most people miss those moments completely. Imagine you're sitting across from someone you've just met. The conversation is flowing. They're funny. They're charismatic. You're starting to feel relaxed. And then something small happens. Maybe the waiter makes a simple mistake with the order. Maybe the drink arrives later than expected. And suddenly the person you're with reacts in a way that feels slightly off. Maybe they make a sarcastic comment. Maybe they roll their eyes. Maybe they speak to the waiter with a tone that feels unnecessarily harsh. At first, it might seem insignificant. After all, everyone has bad days. But moments like these can reveal something very important. Because narcissistic personalities often feel comfortable showing subtle disrespect toward people they believe have less social power. The waiter, the cashier, the stranger on the street. These small interactions are often where someone's true character slips through. And the reason this matters so much is because it reveals how they behave when they believe there are no consequences. But that's not the only test. Another very common one happens during conversation. It usually appears as a joke, something playful, something that sounds harmless. They might tease you about something small, your job, your hobbies, the way you said something. And if you laugh along, the teasing may continue, a little sharper, a little more personal. What they're often doing in that moment is testing your boundaries. Not consciously in every case, but instinctively. They're observing how much criticism you tolerate, how much self-doubt they can introduce into the interaction without losing your attention. Because for many narcissistic personalities, relationships are not about connection, they're about control. And control begins with small tests. Another subtle test happens through emotional intensity. Sometimes a narcissistic personality will begin sharing deeply personal stories very quickly. Childhood trauma, past relationships, painful experiences. At first, this can feel like emotional openness. It can make you feel trusted, chosen, special. But what's often happening is something psychologists call accelerated intimacy. They're fast-forwarding the emotional timeline of the relationship. Because when someone feels emotionally bonded quickly, they're less likely to question behavior later. It's a way of building attachment before trust has actually been earned. And perhaps the most overlooked test of all happens at the end of the date. It's the moment when the evening is wrapping up, when you're both deciding whether you want to see each other again. A narcissistic personality may suddenly shift their energy. Maybe they become distant. Maybe they withdraw attention. Maybe they delay replying to your message afterward. This is often another subtle test. They're observing how much effort you will make to regain their approval. Will you double text? Will you apologize for something you didn't do? Will you try harder to win their interest? These behaviors reveal something very important to them, whether you are someone who will tolerate emotional inconsistency. Because for narcissistic personalities, attention is currency. And the more someone chases their attention, the more control they feel in the relationship. But here's the part many people misunderstand. These tests are rarely obvious. They often appear as small, forgettable moments. A comment here, a shift in tone there, a moment of disrespect that feels easy to excuse. Which is why so many people only recognize the pattern much later. Sometimes months into the relationship, sometimes years. But once you learn to notice these early signals, something interesting begins to happen. You stop focusing only on how someone makes you feel, and you start observing how they treat the world around them. You notice how they speak to strangers, how they handle frustration, how they react when things don't go exactly the way they expected. Because those moments reveal far more about someone's character than any charming conversation ever could. Real emotional maturity shows up in small interactions, in patience, in empathy, in respect toward people who cannot offer anything in return. And those qualities tend to appear quietly, without performance, without manipulation. So the next time you meet someone new, pay attention to the moments most people ignore. Because the earliest signs of a narcissistic personality are rarely loud. They're subtle. They appear in passing. But once you learn to recognize them, they become impossible to miss. If you enjoy exploring the psychology behind relationships and human behavior, hit the subscribe button below. Because understanding these patterns can change the way you see people and protect you from the wrong ones.